I started the 5 Minute Friday series as an opportunity to share interesting discussions and views from within the HR tech community, and I hope you've enjoyed the series. I thought I'd give a quick recap of some of the conversations I've had with people over the last 4 months. So there have been 15 people in total that I've spoken to, and my first conversation started with Esther O'Callaghan. And talking to Esther, it was really clear from her that there's a big problem the society needs to solve, and that companies just aren't very good at recruiting and onboarding young talent. And she talked about some things that we need to do in order to get really good at tapping into this incredible talent pool. Then had a conversation with Ben Kibbe, and it felt really relevant at the time as companies were starting to think about how they would open up and what their future work model was looking at. And Ben Kibbe is as head of the Northern California market for Mercer, had great insight into what all the big tech companies were doing. And what was clear from that is that there was no sort of standard approach, but generally most companies are moving towards some form of hybrid model. Then we heard from Julia O'Mahony, who had both worked in a big sort of corporate and then in academia, and she talked about how the mental health crisis is first and foremost a systemic issue that is being created by companies, where as employees feel most of their stress and pressure comes from within companies. Then had a great conversation with Mark Stelzner, who's the founder and managing partner at IA, where he talked about how companies need to start thinking differently, maybe about benefits and how they reimburse employees as opposed to giving them sort of fixed benefit programs, and how he thinks is a real trend and change to come, a consumerization of benefits. Then talked to Enrique, who's head of EMEA for G2. And what fascinates me about the conversation with Enrique is that Enrique has the real live data on what it is that HR buyers are actually searching for and how those trends have changed over time. So that was great to understand what buyers are really looking for. And then had a conversation with Andy Lever. Andy is one of my go-to people in HR tech, having been the initial sort of leader for both SuccessFactors and Workday in Europe, and now operating partner at Notion. And with Andy, we talked about the gig economy and the shift towards sort of plural lifestyles, and what organizations need to do to take advantage of this change. And then went to Noel McGonigal, a client HR director at Savills, and he talked about how they're looking to try and capture some of the lessons that they've learned and actually write down what are the good things that they've learned that they need to really embed into their culture going forward. Then spoke to Liana Attard, who's the multinational client leader for Mercer across Asia, Middle East, and Africa. And we talked about the impact that the pandemic has had on mental health provision across the region, and how there's a huge shift in the focus within Asia on employee wellness, and how companies are really sort of stepping up and thinking very, very differently. Then talked to Bernie Kenobi, and Bernie, again, sort of on the client side, the company side, Bernie has always been really passionate about wellness, and as the global benefits leader for ACOM, had invested over the last few years in putting in place the foundation for a very, very strong wellbeing program, which enabled them to support their employees through the pandemic. And he talked about what they had done and tips for success. And then sort of sticking with wellness and mental health, talked to Dr. Nick Taylor, the CEO and founder of Unmind, who's just announced that they just raised 50 million. And he talked about why preventative mental health care is now being recognized being so important. And he also talked, which I thought was fascinating, about how he manages his own mental health and supports his own mental health as someone who's got all the challenges and stresses of leading a very, very fast growing startup. Then talked to David Whitfield from HR Data Hub, and where we really focused the discussion around the ethnicity pay gap within organizations, and really why it's so incredibly important to have data in order to make a change within organizations and their drive to do that. And then talked to Yvonne Sonsino, and who's the global co-lead of Next Stage at Mercer. And this is an area that I certainly haven't really thought a huge amount about, but I find really interesting, which is all about people living and working longer. How companies now to start thinking about the other end of the employment spectrum and look at the employment implications of longevity. And then talk to Dr. Lorna Friedman, who has recently become a consultant of the year. And she talked about the role employers are going to play in supporting their employees' well-being, especially now, and talk through the 4 key areas for employers to hone in on. So access, affordability, accommodation, and education. And then wrapped up with my my co-founder from what was Thomson's Online Benefits, now Darwin, and now my co-investor in the Pink Investment Club, where so Michael Whitfield, where we talked about why 2 founders are better than one, and why people and culture that they create is so incredibly key to the success of a business. So it's been absolutely fascinating discussions across a wide range of different topics. Going to now pause over summer and come back with something maybe a little bit different in the autumn. One of the key things that I've learned is that it's impossible to have really interesting discussions with people in only 5 minutes. If you want to watch any of the videos, please do head over to the to my YouTube channel, where all of the videos are stored. And thank you very much for watching and your support.